All right. Well, welcome to session 4.2. Today we will talk about de-risking clean energy investments, especially we have examples from emerging markets. So welcome to the session today. What I do is I would like to invite the panelists to come on to the panel here, and then we will introduce each presenter, and we will have about half an hour on panel discussion after the presentations. And after that, we will open the floor to Q&A, either in person here, and you can go up to the microphone in the middle of the room here to share your question, or through the app, and we will access to both. So without much further ado, I would like to invite the first presenter, and I will invite all five panelists onto the stage. The first one, Mr. Duttatreya Das from Ember Energy, please. And second, Mr. Badri Nath Baral from Woodrock International. Mr. Jess Bitterson from Smart Power Myanmar. Mr. Jens Rodenhauser from Doinyo Group. And lastly, Ms. Paula Valencia from RMI. There's still people coming in. That is great to see. So as we all know, closing the financing gap for clean energy investment in Asia Pacific is one of the most important measures to accelerate clean energy and energy transition in this region. And according to the recent estimates, we need about 1.3 trillion US dollars annually by 2030 to track towards our net zero targets. However, the role of private sector investments in clean energy is still limited, especially for this region and in emerging markets, and balancing the risk profiles and the risk appetites and the rewards for the emerging market, for clean energy investment in emerging markets is still challenging. And that's why we have this session today, and we have excellent practitioners with examples from Myanmar, India, Nepal, the Philippines, and from Germany to share with us examples of different blended finance structure, of technical assistance, of policy innovations that can drive financing for clean energy forwards, especially in emerging markets in this region. So without much further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker, Mr. Duttatreya Das from Ember Energy. Mr. Duttatreya is an analyst at Ember Energy, but on senior research fellow at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. He works at the intersection of policy and technology for industrial decarbonization, and he has deep experience in India's renewable energy sector, including auctions, cost-lowering mechanism for firm renewable power, and he started his career at ONGC, so oil and gas, and has worked across think tanks and market intelligence platforms. So please, Mr. Duttatreya.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope you're having a great time here in Manila. To set the agenda for the next 10 minutes or 8 minutes probably, I think it has already started. So I would like to challenge conventional thinking around risk assessment and risk mitigation, and think more deeply about how these matrices actually feed into the cost of capital decision making across countries. Right. Across large parts of the world, both developing and developed, uh, discussions around risk assessment and cost of capital is done on a rule of thumb basis. What we propose here is a methodology or a framework of sorts which tries to do a more data-led analysis around better understanding of risks and cost of capital. At the heart of the framework, there are three steps that would actually lead you to do this. One is understand the universe of risks systematically, measure risks meticulously, and once you are done with that, you try to understand de-risking mechanisms. Right. Yeah. To set the context, this particular case study was done for the case of utility scale solar in India. The figure to my left shows that solar has actually grown by leaps and bounds in India. In 2024 alone, close to 25 gigawatts of solar was added. A pretty hot market right now. In terms of financing, somewhere around 15 billion USD went to the clean power sector in 2024. If India wants to achieve its power sector transition that it targets, then by 2032, annual financing needs to reach 60 billion USD. So a 4x jump from the current levels. This is not going to be easy. Yeah. I should not be overemphasizing this too much because I am standing within a development bank. So, but the theme stays that like if the risk profile in a particular country increases, the cost of capital increases, and this is a thumb rule that applies everywhere across the world. That's the rule of the uh, across the world. Yes. And there are two problems that come with high cost of capital. This is pretty basic, but I would again like to emphasize on it. The first problem is across the developing world, the 50% of the LCOE or the levelized cost of electricity can be attributed to the financing costs. So if you are able to get down your cost of capital by 50%, then maybe you can reduce your electricity cost by one fourth of it. Again, these are all hypothetical scenarios, but what I want to emphasize here is cost of capital plays a very important role in ensuring that clean electricity is affordable. That's number one. And if your electricity is not affordable, if your cost of capital tends to be high, then you don't have enough demand for that clean electricity in the system, right? So naturally your system would tend to build less renewables, and so as your cost of capital increases, your gigawatts of renewable that gets built out is way lesser, right? And so these are the double whammy, which is affordability and low RE build out. Yeah. So what we do here is we follow, this is the first step where we are trying to map the universe of risks, right? We divide the risks into two categories: project specific risks, which might be things around generation shortfalls, delays in commissioning. There might be sector wide risks which affect the entire sector. For example, currency depreciation, if you are taking foreign currency loans, tariffs can be a sector wide risk as well. What we do is we do a very extensive literature review, use all the knowledge that's available there. We make questionnaires and float it to developers, financiers, policymakers to understand what they think is a bigger risk at this point of time, right? So it helps us map the contemporary risk profile of utility scale solar projects much better. So this is the first step that we follow in our framework. So this is something I shamelessly borrowed from IEA, but this is just for illustrative purposes. The green bar on the left is the base cost of capital. If you start adding on your risk premiums due to multiple events, you tend to get your cost of capital rising and rising until you reach the blue bar where you have accounted for all the risks. So this is the cost of capital we tend to see in the markets. But then there are a lot of de-risking mechanisms which can actually get down your cost of capital to a certain extent. So this is what we want to replicate for a market that we are studying, which is India in this particular case, but in principle can be carried out for any market that you're studying. I think one of the most important theses around understanding risks is cut your losses, right? So risks manifest, I think, in one way, that is, it brings down profit, right? So whether your revenue comes down, your cost increase, or your cash flow gets delayed, but at the end of the story, your profit comes down, right? So if you are worried about any issue, right, whether it's generation shortfall from solar, right? what you do is you build scenarios where you actually plot profits for different capacity utilization factors that your solar plants might be seeing. So generally what you see is your average capacity utilization factors, and the profits that it gives will be of course concentrated in the center because of the nature of it. But then you have a kind of a distribution that whether the profit ranges from a lower end to a higher end, right? So maybe the lower end shows very low CUFs, the higher end shows very high CUFs, and your entire risk varies between that. What essentially we do or we plan to do is we call the average tendency P50 estimate, which is the CUF your market might be seeing on average basis. But then you as an investor would decide, if you are a debt investor, you might put your tail risk at P90. If you are an equity investor, you might put your tail risk at P75, right? And so this is how, so the whole idea being the differential in the profits that you are expecting for a particular event uh, turns into the risk premium, right? And so this is what we do for all sorts of risks which were identified through stakeholder consultations. Here you can see that delays we have plotted on average, it's a 17-month delay. It can become 26 months on extreme cases. There are multiple reasons why. We do similar sort of assessment for solar generation shortfall, which is actually not a risk in India because a lot of plants actually are generating much more than what they commit on their financial appraisal forms. Yeah, we do this for multiple risks. But one thing I would like to take some time is this wholesale change in mindset that has come for renewable energy auctions, where the government is no more auctioning um, a lot of plain vanilla solar and wind, but now the government goes and asks developers to meet a certain load profile. So I give my load profile, you need to blend in solar, wind, and batteries and have to maintain that load profile. And so these projects are somewhat new for the Indian markets. They carry enormous amount of risk, and we try to map those risks as well. There are risks associated with power market exposure. Uh, and then there are multiple such risks. Um, I'll, I'll skip most of it because of paucity of time, but yeah, this is the final slide that I would want to bring your attention. If you're talking about contemporary discussions happening in media or policy circles, a risk that is highlighted very often is commissioning delays in India, uh, problems around the quality of modules that are being manufactured. But that's just popular narrative. If you actually plot your risks on a profile and use a method like this, you understand that power market exposure is a very big risk right now. And this might be due to multiple reasons. Uh, Things such as price cannibalization happening during solar hours, which creates a lot of problem. So what this method tries to say is it goes beyond the normal discussions and tries to understand something based on data available so that you can get in policies and financing mechanisms like CFDs or FTRs, which are used as financial hedging products. Yes, and there's a whole plethora of options that you can use, whether it's de-risking land acquisition by solar park policy and many other such projects. So this is the third part of it, which is mitigation, which we won't be talking about it, but there's a structured way to understand this as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Treya. Thank you so much. That is the first presentation we selected as the first because it's really set out for us sort of the different types of risk that we see in renewable energy in markets, in emerging markets in this region. And I think it's really great to have it very clearly. And then the subsequent presentation will share with us the kind of examples of how we de-risk of different types of risk that presented in the first one. So with that, I would like to invite Mr. Badri Baral, Country Director Nepal for Windrock International, to share with us his project Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund. Just a quick introduction, Mr. Bara is over 20 years in clean energy financing and private sector development, and he leads the SECF, which he presents here, which has de-risked DRE projects in fragile markets. So please, Mr. Bara.
Thank you. Good afternoon and Kumutsaka, Manila. So it's pleasure to be here. I'm thankful to SF and ADB and being one of the team member of the implementing partners. I have the privilege to present a case study and a success journey of Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund. That is the program of Government of Nepal. Uh, and so we have just 8 minutes, and I'm not sure that I would be able to clarify all your inquiries, but definitely I'll try my best to confuse you. I've also learned that important tricks from my teachers earlier. If you're able to confuse your audience, you are a good presenter. Hopefully, yeah, I'll be able to confuse you, and once you're confused, you'll have more inquiries, and we will have interaction in the future. So let me start my presentation uh, by, yeah, by sharing some of the interesting grassroots level stories why de-risking of distributed renewable energy is important. This, one of the highest altitude mini hydro projects at the Everest base camp would not have been under constructions, which is going to replace LPGs carried by mule and humans for over 500 as ecotourism SMEs. This farmer, fish farmer, would have migrated to Gulf countries for the livelihoods. The small isolated microhydro projects run by a community cooperative would not have connected to the grids and still would have run at the 15 to 20% of plant load factors. This food industries would have still relied on imported diesel, 1,500 liters per day, and also the grids. Similarly, one of the wire manufacturers would have still used more than 1,200 kgs of LPGs per day for melting a wire. Similarly, any electric vehicle owner would have reluctance to go for a long drive because of lack of sufficient infrastructures and EV charging stations. So apart from that, what were the other angle that DRE de-risking demanded? So sector was heavily subsidy driven for over 2 decades. There was a comfort zone. It has to tackle for private sector investment and more commercial angles. Similarly, high perceived risk were there, and there is a limited capital, loan and equity funding, as well as there is a specific knowledge gap among project developers, beneficiaries, and financiers on clean energy investments. Yes, there are viability gaps, making these small distributed renewable energy projects viable. So what we did then, through Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund, we just boost the confidence of the investors, and they took the risk to invest and make it commercially viable. So what it impacted at the grassroots level, this picture says is all. So it is a very small efforts and a small project and small investments, but you can see across the road, there was a small solar irrigation pump that was contributed to have an off-farm paddy. And at the other side of the roads, you can see the barren land, how that has impacted in the productivity and livelihood of the rural household. So how we have done this de-risking? So definitely it was pegged within the government policy. We have renewable energy subsidy policy 2018, as well as RE renewable energy subsidy delivery mechanism 2022 under the Ministry of Energy, Water Resources and Irrigations, and led by Alternative Energy Promotion Center of Government of Nepal. So the Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund was housed within that. For that, there was a financial support from British Embassy and FCDO and DI UK Global and Windrock International implemented the projects along with the AEPC. The goal of that program is just to make a transformational change in the DRE sectors by mobilizing private investments and leveraging public investments. So how we did this? There were two aspects. technical assistance through a Nepal Renewable Energy Program. And also it has this viability gap funding mechanism that is through Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund that was established within the government mechanism, and it's the government of Nepal's vehicles. Program, Nepal Renewable Energy Program ended in March 2025, but the Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund is still up and running, and there are other development partners like European Union and GIZ that is still using that, and government of Nepal is negotiating with other development agencies and private investors to use the vehicle. So viability gap funding through SCCF runs in two basic principles. There has to be a proven viability gap, and payment has to be on the result based. So if that is the case, then there are 8 different funding windows that would cater to different projects and nature. So just to show you how robust the process is, so it has like 2 stages of applications, fully online mechanisms, concept notes, and then full applications. And it is approved through the government mechanism. But at the same time, the success of the Sustainable Energy Challenge Funds lies on the government ownership, independent evaluations, and transparent process. So you see that process would be robust and look like cumbersome, but there are examples of approving of projects within 37 days. We have that example. So results, numbers speaks itself. So I'm not going to next explain in detail, but there are 4 times leverage achieved from this mechanism. So what are the important lessons learned? Strong government ownership is really, really important for the sustainability and ownership of projects. There was some initial resistance as private sectors were heavily dependent on subsidy, but over the period with the perseverance, it has broken. And process look longer, but provided the investment readiness and private sectors has the knowledge, we can expedite that. It has fostered innovations like various business models like public-private partnership and RESCO. SCCF has an adaptability to accommodate different specific technologies targeted to specific geography and specific process. But at the end, most important part is there has to be a strong capacity building mechanism for all the stakeholders. So this model is replicable and scalable. So there are strong DRE demands. There are lots of projects in pipeline. SCCF is just the beginning, but there are other sectors, including the utilizing surplus electricity and micro hydros and diversifying generations and energy transition, food, energy, and water nexus. So strong collaboration is still needed to make it more successful and sustainable. And while scaling up, there could be a smarter VGF mechanism, capacity building of the sector players, and sustainability plan is the key. So I'd like to acknowledge the different partners for this, and I'd like to conclude my presentation just by saying, so this is definitely not the silver bullet for all the solutions, but definitely this is a bullet train. Let's power this. Thank you. Selamat.
Thank you, Mr. Baral. There is such a great example of how holistically there's a very sort of full picture of really blended finance structure, isn't it? It's got public sector, got private sector, got technical assistance. So we will get more into that in detail during the panel discussion. So next, I would like to invite the next speaker who will share with us also a different kind of blended finance working to accelerate renewable energy in an emerging market or in an emerging market in Asia Pacific. Mr. Jess Galiba Peterson from Smart Power Myanmar. Jess is a strategy director at Smart Power Myanmar, a former tech founder turned climate operator. Jess launched Myanmar's first tech accelerator and now works to scale off-grid solar and blended finance structures. He has advised global development agencies on market strategies in federal states, focusing on innovation, inclusion, and impact. So please, Jess, share more with us.
Thank you so much. This one. Thank you so much to ASAF. Thank you, Han, for having me on this panel. My name is Jess Peterson. I'm the strategy director at Smart Power Myanmar. Smart Power Myanmar is a program that's implemented by PACT and has been around since 2017. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done to develop the market for DRE solar in Myanmar using guarantees and what we've learned from that. Across Southeast Asia, millions of businesses are grappling with high energy costs, and many still face unreliable power. Most of these businesses are family-run, small and medium enterprises. They are important job creators in the local community, and they're the backbones of their local economies. What they need is clean, affordable, and dependable energy, not just to keep the lights on, but to stay competitive in the long term. For businesses in rural areas, this challenge is particularly stark. It's often the choice between shutting down operations at noon or paying outrageous prices to keep your diesel generators running, if diesel is even available. But even in urban areas with high grid availability and access, rising tariffs and volatility are squeezing the margins of these SMEs. They're ready for solar, but the capital markets aren't ready for them. Adoption of commercial and industrial solar requires someone willing to invest. Someone has to put up the money, either the business owner, the developer, or the bank. But what we've seen is that when it comes to SMEs, no one is willing to take the first risk. In the last 5 years, my colleagues and I have talked to hundreds of SMEs who all told us the same thing. They told us that banks don't want to lend to them because they don't have enough collateral. They told us that ESCOs are hesitant to do PPAs for C&I projects because the ESCOs might not have the capital either. And they told us that MDBs and DFIs typically don't fund individual projects for SMEs, something I'm sure many of you in here have seen as well. So what that means is that if you're a business owner and you need, let's say, $100,000 for solar panels or batteries for your rice mill or your shrimp farm or your rubber processing plant, where do you go? In most countries in Southeast Asia at this point, you're out of options. So 3 years ago, my colleagues and I set out to change that. With funding from the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, GEAP, we created a first loss guarantee facility where we work directly with local commercial banks in Myanmar to extend loans to SMEs. And backed by our guarantees, the bank's risk is dramatically reduced. And they're able to push loans through their credit committees that would otherwise previously have been refused. The results we've seen speak for themselves. To date, we have supported more than 80 businesses that have installed commercial industrial solar plants totaling 10 megawatt of output. On average, these businesses have recovered the cost of their solar investment within 2.5 years, just based on the savings they achieved by not having to buy diesel all the time. Typically, their loans are paid back within 36 months, 3 years, and in many cases, even faster than that. Importantly, we have had 0 defaults to date. What that means is that we can recover our guarantees in full once the loans are paid off and use the guarantees again for new loans and projects. In turn, this creates an impact ratio of as much as 10x. $10 of solar investment catalyzed for every $1 of guarantee funding that we provide to the banks. But this is not just about financial outcomes. What we've done is we've gone one step deeper and we've evaluated the impact these businesses have on their communities. And it's quite immense. The SMEs that have had the foresight to invest in C&I solar are typically also the ones that are the pillars of their local communities. On average, for each C&I solar project that we support, we secure 38 jobs directly, and indirectly, we protect 100 jobs and livelihoods through upstream and downstream value chains of these businesses. So in summary, through the deployment of our guarantees, we have created a low risk, low cost, and high impact vehicle for catalyzing commercial and industrial solar in the markets that need it the most. So what's next? Well, if we could pull this off in Myanmar, then surely it can be done anywhere, certainly across other markets in Southeast Asia. And that's exactly what we want to do. So by combining capital from multilateral development banks, philanthropic donors, and development funders, we are building a facility that will accelerate the adoption of DRE solutions for businesses across Southeast Asia. With first loss guarantees as the cornerstone, we are working closely with local commercial banks through trainings, through digital tools, and technical advisory in combination to enable them to grow their C&I pipeline and execute new transactions faster and faster. So we call on the entire ecosystem, that's all of you in here, to put guarantees on the table and do it now. Because guarantees can play an outsized role in the green energy transition globally. And Southeast Asia is very well conditioned to utilize these guarantees. When all the critical players come together, funders, the private sector, the development community, we can build a sustainable engine for renewable energy growth for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jess, finishing even earlier than the time indicated. And actually, this is one of the very powerful financial instruments that a lot of us in blended finance have seen. So I'm so glad that we're here to be able to, for you to share that example. And yes, we'll talk more about how to scale it up in other markets. Now, another type of financing and financing structures that might work in different markets, and looking at a little bit more tailored approach to blended finance. And with that, I would like to invite Mr. Jens Rodenhauser to present his examples and experience in this space. Mr. Jens is Head of Advisory Services at Donya Suntrans GmbH. He has over 23 years of experience in solar PV, battery storage, and hybrid power projects across Central and Southeast Asia. And Yen has led technical and financial advisory work for ADB, IFC, and multiple governments in Uzbekistan, Cambodia, Bhutan, and Kazakhstan. So please share with us, Jens.
Thanks a lot. Welcome to this session, and many thanks for the opportunity to present here to you today. I'm trying to change the scope slightly now after the SME examples, which you just heard about. I would like to change the perspective more towards C&I clients, so commercial and industrial clients, in particular here with a focus on island grids, and it's a more project-centric approach. What I'm going to introduce to you is a more holistic approach to the overall de-risking, because it's not only the financial side, it's also the technology side that has to contribute together with the financing side to these technical issues. So looking at such island grids, and it was already mentioned that these can heavily depend on diesel engines or heavy fuel engines. You have on that side, the limited access to infrastructure, the high cost of grid extensions, and typically no alternative energy sources. And this is now where the renewables come into place to provide reliance on these diesel generators due to a better cost structure. We have familiar technologies, and we have also a rather limited technical expertise that is required, because we are simply not talking about rocket science. And by doing so, we are able to address some of the most crucial risks and consequences, because we are able to address the fuel supply disruptions. We are able to address high and volatile engine energy costs, as well as, of course, the greenhouse gas emissions. And if we are willing to embrace renewable energies, this gives us the chance to go for, or to achieve reduced energy costs, because we are having the savings on diesels, we have lower O&M costs, and we have a long-term price stability. Basically, we're giving the energy consumers control over their energy supply. We have enhanced power security. Of course, we are also going for the important targets of decarbonization. And we have a series of finance and economic advantages depending on how we are structuring blended finance here. So if we are looking into such, we call it fuel saver approaches, there are typically two main structures which we are seeing with our clients. We are seeing either projects that are implemented on an off-balance sheet structure, and on the other hand, we see projects which are implemented on an on-balance sheet structure. So with the off-balance sheet, we have an independent investor, typically an IPP, which is financing, owning, and operating the generation asset, linking this generation capacity with a long-term power purchase agreement to the energy consumer, to the industrial client. For the industrial client, we see the reduction of the upfront capital expenditures and of course quite increased flexibility in terms of risk allocation from their perspective. And there are a number of IPPs and investors that are willing to go for such structures, which are willing to invest in such structures and accept these risks because that's their daily business and their core competence. Just to mention this, the typical structure is either build, own, operate, or sometimes also transfer at the end of the lifetime or at the end of the finance term to the off-taker here. On balance sheet, that's of course an issue which we are seeing in many markets, that companies, that corporate structures are not financially strong enough to do to carry on these investments themselves. So, but here in this case, we would see the upfront capital investment done by the energy consumer, by the operator. It's owned and operated by this consumer. The positive thing is in certain markets, in certain environments, we see very attractive payback periods, which can be in the range of 3 to 5 years. Typically, this is the case when we are seeing 100% equity being in place with loan components. Of course, these payback periods are usually slightly longer. And risk-wise, of course, the on-balance sheet is the more risky approach from the consumer's perspective. I was introducing earlier to you that I would like to open the focus a little bit, saying it's not only the financial side, because raising money to realize a project is one thing, but the first thing that needs to be done is making sure that the project is really optimized in the sense so that we are putting funds into the right projects and the right amount of funds. So not overfunding, but also not providing or saving money on the wrong side. I'm not going to the details of this slide because that's going to take the 8 minutes completely otherwise. But the idea here is, what I'd like to flag to you is the solutions and optimizing the technical project, and then based on the technical project, designing and setting up and shaping the financing of that project is working for grid-connected projects as well as for off-grid situations. And it requires a comprehensive technical and economic feasibility and really drilling down into the details of this feasibility. The result which you can see on the right-hand side is for one of our industrial clients here, a situation where we have an on-grid situation, including components such as wind, solar, and batteries, which are allowing us basically during daytime to completely operate the system here. It's an island system on renewables only and only utilize grid and batteries during the nighttime. How is this done? And that's something where I'm just saying it is really a question of optimization. There are different optimization strategies, and the key point is really understanding your client's needs, the grid's needs, and shaping from there the optimization strategy. And the result is, as you can see, it's not just a single point, but it's hundreds of or thousands of simulations and details you have to look into. Now, putting these things together, what are the remaining challenges? What are the topics that where we see that the market participants are still struggling? For everyone who's going with their own investment, we still see the high upfront investment. So it is a challenge to commercial and industrial consumers to raise these financial means by themselves. We see certain improvements, of course, to the overall price decline there, but in particular, when we are talking about remote locations, there is the risk, which my colleagues have already been mentioned, and it is from an investor's perspective, it is risk that's to be priced in. But here we are coming to the point where we have to look into different financing alternatives. As already mentioned, on balance and off balance are here one of the two key concepts. We have to address the intermittency and storage costs on the battery side, which is an important technical equipment here to address these. We see substantial cost decreases, which is helping the projects currently substantially. We still see requirement for backup power. I've been attending a session earlier today on smart supply grids in the neighboring hall. It was very interesting, very inspiring to see what the colleagues were telling there and how they're addressing these points. And that's something where we have to work more intensively on. Operational and maintenance complexity, it is there, but it's not rocket science, so we are able to handle this. And furthermore, we have still a certain economic and policy uncertainty, which is the reason why we need to have all participants, also the policymakers, to help us with these topics here. As summarizing everything, what I would like to convey is when we're talking about financing and de-risking projects, it's not only the financing side, it's also the technical side. Both have to come together. It's about finding the right structure, finding the right means, and also going for phased implementation. This is something which we are seeing with our clients very frequently, that they're going for the low-hanging fruits first and increase and continue from there, increasing renewable penetrations, still targeting the 100% renewables as a target, but not from day one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jens, for your presentation. We talk a lot about, policy level and sort of policy support for these projects, but with experience on the ground with projects like this, it actually highlights even more the need for policy support and incentives, and also sort of the innovations needed to drive these projects forward. So thanks for the example. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Paula Valencia from RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, to share with us examples in the work that being done on the more high-risk profile type projects and sector and technologies. So just by way of introduction, Paula is a manager at RMI. She leads RMI's engagement here in the Philippines and manages their third derivative program, which de-risk the early stage climate techs in hard to abate sectors. And that's what she will share with us today. Thank you, Paula. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction, Han, and good afternoon, everyone. Today we heard about the different types of financing available for low carbon development projects here in Asia. And as the final presenter, I will be focusing on de-risking and financing industrial decarbonization, specifically in India and Southeast Asia, with our program Future Industries Partnership. So let me begin by setting the scene for why industrial decarbonization in India and Southeast Asia is urgent, but also an enormous opportunity. India and Southeast Asia are rapidly urbanizing. Between 2025 and 2050, the region's total population will grow by 14%, but its urban population will grow by over 50%. That means more cities, more buildings, and more demand for energy-intensive materials like steel, cement, and chemicals. By 2025, this region already represents 25% of the global population and will account for 20% of global population growth through 2050. In India alone, floor area is set to double by 2040. All of this is tied to economic growth. The region's GDP is projected to rise by 50% by 2030, almost double the global rate. But this growth also brings emissions. As industrialization accelerates, so will greenhouse gas emissions, unless we act now. That's why this region is central to the global climate fight. In industrial decarbonization, here is not just necessary, it's a lever for global impact. Southeast Asia and India are becoming the epicenter of global energy demand, projected to drive over 55% of energy growth between now and 2035. But the energy mix fueling this growth is still heavily fossil-based, especially coal, which still powers 47% of Southeast Asia's electricity and 73% of India's. Unsurprisingly, emissions have surged, more than tripling since 2000. mostly from electricity, heat, and industrial production. And today, industry is both the largest and fastest growing energy consumer in these regions. While industry is already the largest final energy consumer and continues to grow faster than any other sector, this growth presents a dual reality. On one hand, a massive opportunity to deploy new technologies at scale, embed efficiency into industrial development, and leapfrog into low carbon pathways. On the other hand, it presents a significant challenge as emissions from steel, cement, chemicals, and other hard to abate sectors rise sharply and threaten to lock in fossil fuel systems. Despite the opportunities, investment flows tell a different story. Most climate finance in Asia and worldwide still goes to renewables, electric mobility, and grid infrastructure. While those are important, the industrial sector remains underfunded, despite being one of the most critical and high emitting. The capital needed to decarbonize these sectors remains limited. This chart from Climate Policy Initiative illustrates the scale of financing imbalance. Out of 1.27 trillion in annual global climate finance, over 850 billion went to just two sectors, energy systems and transport. These are more mature with proven returns and lower risk. In contrast, the industry received only 9 billion or less than 1% of total climate finance despite its massive emissions footprint. This is largely because industrial solutions are often early stage, capital intensive, and lack clear commercial models, especially in emerging markets. This presents a huge opportunity. Financing early stage industrial decarbonization technologies, those hard to abate industries, again, like steel, cement, and chemicals, can help bend the emissions curve while opening new markets for climate capital. This gap highlights the urgent need for more private capital to flow into industrial decarbonization, particularly in the regions of India and Southeast Asia. Public finance alone cannot meet the scale of the challenge. Private sectors have a unique opportunity to step in earlier, support first of a kind projects, and shape the growth of high impact solutions. By helping de risk these technologies, private capital can unlock scalable climate impact and strong returns. To recap, industrial decarbonization in these regions is both essential and underinvested. The technologies we need are emerging, but they face multiple barriers to scale. First, the perceived risk is high. Most industrial climate technologies are still in early stages and will need some time to prove commercial scale. That makes investors hesitant, especially in hard to abate sectors with long project timelines and unfamiliar revenue models. Second, the innovation ecosystem is fragmented. Startups, corporates, and investors often operate in parallel but disconnected tracks. Corporates need reliable, cost effective solutions. Startups need validation and access to industrial facilities, and investors need clear de risk pathways. Without coordination, promising solutions stall. Third, the incentives are often misaligned. Pilots can be expensive. Procurement policies are not structured to low carbon performance, and capital providers are still learning how to evaluate risks and value in this space. That's why we need to deliberate interventions to de risk early stage technologies through validation, piloting, and technical support, build strategic partnerships between startups and industry players, and align incentives across stakeholders to make industrial decarbonization investable and scalable. Engaging with startups is especially important for this sector. Many breakthrough solutions, whether in low carbon development and cement, hydrogen based steel, or electric heat, are being developed by nimble early stage innovators. These startups bring new ideas, faster iteration cycles, and a willingness to challenge legacy systems. But without support from industry partners and investors, they won't scale. That's where collaboration becomes key. The case for industrial decarbonization is urgent and also a massive opportunity for us. The industrial sector contributes roughly to one third of global emissions, but it receives only 10% of venture capital funding and just 3% of global investment in early stage energy transition technologies. Again, as said earlier, even smaller at less than 1% of the total climate finance funding received in 2021 and 2022. This mismatch shows how underdeveloped the climate finance ecosystem for industrial solutions. And yet, the opportunity is very enormous. By 2050, the industrial decarbonization market could be worth 24 trillion. But we also know that 80% of the technology needed to decarbonize heavy industry hasn't reached market adoption yet, meaning it requires more support, investment, and acceleration. This is especially critical in regions like Southeast Asia, India, and even the Middle East, where demand for industrial products is growing rapidly and supply chains are being reshaped. These are the front lines of industrial emissions, and they are also the most promising test beds for innovation. That's why we at RMI and Third Derivative, or D3, in partnership with HSBC and Founders Factory, launched the Future Industries Partnership. So for those who aren't familiar, D3 is a climate tech accelerator co-founded by RMI to bring those solutions to market faster. D3 works at the intersection of innovation and deployment, supporting early stage startups, building bridges with corporate off-takers, and mobilizing investor capital. So we're delivering a series of 18-month accelerator cohorts over 3 years, supporting 30 plus startups working on transformative industrial solutions. So I'm going to show you a case study, and this is what we're hoping for when we develop D3. So for those who might be familiar, and some of you might not be, one of the most compelling examples of how corporate startup collaboration can unlock financing for industrial decarbonation is the case of Stegra, formerly known as H2 Green Steel. Stegra is developing a first-of-its-kind green steel plant in Sweden using green hydrogen instead of coal. This is a highly capital-intensive and technically ambitious project, exactly the kind of industrial climate solution that usually struggles to raise private investment due to high perceived risk and long lead times. Yet by 2023, the company had raised over 5 billion euros, including approximately 300 million euros in equity, 3.5 billion in debt, and 260 million in public grants. This level of capital mobilization is almost unheard of in an early industrial stage startup. So the key enabler for them, they have early corporate offtake agreements with major industry buyers like Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Scania. So this allowed Stegra to gain the traction from these funders and as well as corporate off-takers because they received the trust early on. Stegra also aligned its project structure with investor expectations, integrated hydrogen and steel production, and leveraging public and philanthropic funding to close the financing gap. So to close again, we are working on this program with HSBC and Founders Factory, and there are gaps indeed for startups and industrial decarbonization. And to bridge this gap, we need deliberate strategies to de-risk investments with technical validation, strategic partnerships, and innovative financing models. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. It's run out of time, but because there's billions of dollars on the screen, so I let it run for a bit. Right, thank you so much. Now we enter, that's the presentations we have for the session today. Now we will open the Q&A. There are already quite a few questions in the app, so I will go straight into the questions with the audience, if that's okay with the panelists. And feel free to answer if you didn't put in the app the question, you can also go straight to the microphone here and ask your question. Just raise your hand. So I would like to start with Mr. Tutatreya. Actually, from Paula's presentation, you talk a lot about the opportunities, but there's very little funding for especially decarbonization in APAC, in the hard-to-abate sector. But broader than that, I think in general, we have a financing gap. So can you just mention again here, there's a question, what kind of risk that are currently deterring investment in clean energy projects? And from your presentation, you mentioned a few. Can you talk more about some of these risks and what are the greatest risks that pose, that currently deterring investment in APAC?
Hello, yeah. I think it talks about technical risks first. So a couple of points there. In terms of technical risk, wind as a technology has seen a lot of problems recently. A lot of this is probably the impact of climate change. Across India, we have seen wind plants actually not generating what they were expected to do so. And there's a huge problem, right? So wind is is an elephant in the room right now, and these patterns might just get aggravated as you move forward because the wind patterns are changing, monsoons are weakening, and so many other long-term patterns that are emerging. So as a technology class, wind is has become a bit uncertain at this point of time, though it's very important. And I think the second technical risk is generally there are projects coming along where you are bundling solar with battery energy storage, right? But the lifetime of a solar plant is, let's say, 20 to 25 years. Lifetime of a battery energy storage system is 10 years, right? So in the middle of the life of the project, you need to actually change the battery energy storage system. And while you are actually raising money, you have no idea about the cost that you would see after 10 years, right, about battery energy storage. That has a lot of uncertainty to it. And so these are the technical challenges. And coming to, I think, regulatory challenges, I think two problems that have been there perennially is one is land related risks. And if you're talking about APAC, these are highly population dense areas, and of course with fragmented land ownership, lack of digital records, and land acquisition has given major headaches in the past and continue to give so. It's just 5% of your project cost, sometimes less than that, but the whole process of clearing land is a problem. And second, I think grid connectivity is something that we are seeing as a big regulatory challenge because solar has just shot up across different places, but transmission, which takes time to build, hasn't actually taken up, right? So these are the regulatory challenges, and I think governments need to foresee a bit about these problems in order to ease out the land acquisition and grid connectivity sort of issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Do you see, also just follow up on that a little bit, do you see the kind of like permitting, licensing procedure as a common risk in APAC?
Definitely, I think we at this point of time probably expect a lot of the government machinery to react fast to a lot of the changes that's happening. But again, the processes move from A to B to C rather than parallel processing, which might happen. And so we wrote a paper where we thought that a lot of these paper trails can be done parallelly rather than wait for one thing to get over the other thing to start. And so I think, of course, this is a big problem, whether land related permitting or transmission related permitting. It's an issue. And a lot of these countries also tend to have regions which have strong regional governments and a strong regional notion. For example, India has many states. States have a lot of autonomy over various issues, for example, land. And I think this creates a lot of problem until both the levels of the government are not talking to each other. I think it just creates that latency in the system.
Thank you. So that really highlights also the role of the government in de-risking, right? And that actually brings me to the next question to Mr. Baral. There's a question for you from the audience of how could you please explain further how SECF de-risk DIE projects, and is it concessional loan or grant subsidy for the approved proposals?
Thank you, Hans. So so I mentioned in the presentation, it's viability gap funding. So it's basically the grants. So, but that grants run with the two basic principles. Are there viability proven on any particular investments? And if that is done, will the investor ready to accept the grants or funds based on the results? So basically, when there are certain viability gaps and there are also knowledge gap, this viability gap funding has played a role to boost the investor confidence, and I showed in one of my slides there. So it's not subsidy. Generally we understand that subsidy means it has kind of a skewed risk towards the subsidy provider, basically government. Risk still lies with the private sector because they have to invest a large sum of money if that investment doesn't work sustainably. So it's basically the grants, but it is result based and just to facilitate the viability.
Thank you. If I may, just following up on your experience with SCCF, can you speak a little bit to the role of the non-financial support? So you mentioned in your presentation about technical assistance. Can you share a little bit of how it actually also help de-risk the investment?
Absolutely. That is very, very important, crucial aspects. So that's why Nepal Renewable Energy Program had this technical assistance components. And when I talk in my initial slides, I mentioned that there is lots of knowledge gap and capacity gap between different stakeholders. And there are in this sector has been in the different trajectory for over 2 decades, and we're just shifting the gears and changing the trajectory from purely subsidy led to a more commercial private investment driven. So this to make this SCCF successful and rolling, there was a role of a technical assistance where it was kind of a sectoral study, certain feasibility studies, capacitating the private sectors, financiers, even the government agencies on different stages and approval process, and also facilitating the matchmaking and financial closures and all that has significantly played the role, and because of this initial level of technical assistance, non financial supports has basically brought different sectors towards the maturity, and we can see some of these solar rooftops and net meter projects have somehow reached to the peak, and they are going on and they are at the tipping points and moving on. There are new technologies and sector coming up. Again, there are lots of gaps and lots of technical assistance required up to certain stages. Once that crosses that tipping points, then sustainable energy challenge fund becomes sustainable itself.
Great, thank you so much. Question from the floor? Yes, please. Please state your name and where you're from.
Thank you so much. My name is Ana Diaz. I come from the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. And well, first of all, thank you very much for the great presentations. It's really encouraging to see all the work that's happening on the ground, really to support, especially SMEs in developing countries to de-risk investments on clean energy. My question is really for all of you or anybody who wants to take it, because there was a word that I was missing from maybe your presentations, which was really the standards that you're using. So my question is really to understand, when working to de-risk clean energy investments, what standards or frameworks do you currently rely on to assess climate-related risks and vulnerabilities, especially in emerging economies, emerging markets? And have you encountered any gaps where internationally recognized standards, such as those from ISO's Climate Adaptation Suite of Standards, which include ones on risk and vulnerability assessments, do you think there's anything missing or there's any gaps that could provide greater consistency and confidence to investors? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone from the panel would like to take this question? Vera?
Thank you. Very pertinent and important questions, and you flagged that none of our presentations talked about the standards. So for sustainable energy challenge funds, we purely rely on the existing standards set by the government of Nepal, because it's government of Nepal programs. So whatever standards and guidelines they have produced, it completely relied on that. But still, when there are evolution of new technologies and sectors, even government had to work on those standards and all. On that, we relied on some of these international standards that are already in the market. But at times, it posed challenges, because this standard also needs to be customized based on the context, geography, and all. So definitely, as you said, there are kind of lots of supports and standardization of different technology processes, based on geography and technology and sectoral needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to chip in? Yeah, please.
I believe the question of standards is also requires to be put into context of the countries where you're acting, because I'm currently working on one project in one country where standards, in particular when it comes to environmental standards, are still under development. So what we have experienced, there's a certain resistance from the government side now to accept 100% or to apply international standards, which are available, of course, to 100%, unless not their own standards have been further developed and implemented. So It's a little bit difficult when there's a little bit of negotiation and yeah, dodging this or that sometimes, to be very honest and very clear. But it's definitely an important point.
Thank you, Jens. Any further questions from the floor? If not, I would like to take the next question from the app, and this one for Jens. The isolated nature of mini grids also means nearby worker villages are costly to connect. So it is costly to connect. Have you approached utilities to see if they are willing to co-procure to meet local needs as well, such as oversizing the CNI system and redistributing the SS?
Okay. Yes and no is the short answer. To make it a little bit more longer and elaborate on this. First of all, as we are purely advisors and we are depending on our clients' will to investigate things like that. If we are in isolated island grids, usually the companies have high interest in supplying energy to the camps of their miners, just to make sure that they have the right basis for their livelihood and continue working there. I have one project in mind where we are actually in a grid-connected situation. It's currently ongoing process where the generation capacity was tendered out to an IPP, and there actually has caused some dynamics and quite interesting discussions with the utility to also obtain certain excess energies and feed them to the grid and use them locally for their grid, also in terms of stabilization. So if the private partner as well as the utility are open to that, this is definitely something that's happening on the local level.
Can I?
Yes, please.
I think it's a really interesting question, and we've done this in Myanmar. The example I'm thinking about is in the south of Myanmar, where we worked with a rubber plantation, rubber processing plant, where there's a nearby village where anyway a lot of the employees of this rubber plant live, and so when they installed solar, they, just like the question suggests, they oversized the solar installation so that they could feed the excess energy into the nearby village and households. It's not technically a slam dunk to design these systems, because often it's hard to assess how much energy will be required by the nearby villages, how many households are actually going to take off electricity, how much will they buy, how will the village grow after installing this, and so on. And it's a company, the anchor tenant, if you will, that takes all the risk, right? So they could end up investing a lot in something they cannot sell down the line. What we've seen is instead almost the opposite, where the initial demand is driven not by the anchor tenant, but the village. And so you have a village that is not grid connected. In the case of Myanmar, they have little to no access to energy. They might run on diesel generators or whatnot. But they work with a developer to install solar, and then they go and find an anchor tenant, a local business or two local businesses, where there is maybe not a guarantee, but there's a very high probability that they will offtake a significant portion of the energy generated, which reduces the risk for the developer and makes a business model work well, both for these anchor tenants and for the households. So short answer, yes, it's possible. It's a really interesting, there's really interesting examples to look into, but it's not always super easy to make the numbers work.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's another one of new model, perhaps, and we can look at also how to de-risk that part to make the numbers work, right? So just have a further on that guarantees work that you shared, Jess. There's a question here, a tough question, let's say. Donor-funded guarantees and grants aren't risk mitigation, just risk transfer, and they can't scale, which I might personally do not necessarily agree with. But the question is very interesting. How can we directly reduce risk factors, such as more accurate credit assessment for SMEs or increasing local currency liquidity for equipment finance? So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think if you look at projects on a project-to-project basis, yes, you could maybe make the argument that if there is a donor-funded facility that provides a guarantee, then it's not risk reduction, it's risk transfer. Maybe. But what we are all about, and I think many of us here and others doing similar work, is building markets, right? So we are here to absorb the risk, or in many cases, what we would say perceived risk, because as I said before, we actually don't see a lot of credit issues. We haven't had any defaults. So these are fairly safe loans. The banks might not agree with this. We know banks are conservative, right? They don't like to take risk. We have the opportunity to take a little bit more risk. So we do that. But we're not willing to take that level of risk forever. What we're all about is reducing that risk over time as the banks get more and more comfortable issuing credit for, in this case, solar loans. So when we started our work, we did 100% guarantees. We did 80% guarantees, very high guarantee ratios, because that's the only way we could even start having a conversation with the banks. We don't do that anymore. We don't even do 50% guarantees anymore. We do 10, 20, in some cases 30% guarantees. So we've managed to drive down the guarantee ratios by working alongside the banks, demonstrating to them that actually these loans are not that risky. And that meant in the beginning we'd had to absorb a little bit more risk than maybe we would like to. And yes, we were able to do that because we had a donor that was willing to take that risk. But the end goal here is that one day, hopefully, we don't have to put in any guarantees. That might take a while, but until then, we're driving down the guarantee ratios so that with whatever guarantee funding we have available, we can do more and more loans, back more and more loans, and grow in bigger and bigger market. That's how we look at it.
Thank you. That really highlights also the role of the local banks in this work, right? And because they're quite conservative. And so if we look at the risking, we targeted the sort of outside where the banks would normally invest in. And that's why I would like to shift to Paula, sort of the very high risk type climate tech and the interventions that you do in third derivative has been supporting climate tech in the high risk segment. You shared an example with Swedish, in Sweden, the Swedish market. Is there other examples here in APAC that you can share? And if it's not as successful, then can you share sort of the challenges that the climate tech in APAC face?
So we've just recently started our program, so we don't have the examples yet from the specific program, but with D3, we have several startups coming from Southeast Asia. So for example, there is a geothermal startup from Thailand, and they are working on, again, hard to abate sectors. But again, they are able to get financing because of like the balance or blended financing from different types of stakeholders available. So that's a combination of philanthropic funding for very early de-risking, and then private finance would come in, equity investment, and then they can eventually apply for debt. But eventually they were able to access those funds because they get corporate off-takers along the way, and that's how they get the trust of these financing institutions.
Yes, please.
So I think in Asia Pacific, one of the bigger tools that a lot of governments have, and I shouldn't be putting it so bluntly, are the state-owned enterprises, because let's say the government wants to do a risky experiment around CCUS or low carbon hydrogen steel making. So the government has a lot of companies in its portfolio which it can actually ask to do certain programs like that. Also, you have a lot of big conglomerates which operate across sectors. So a lot of these clean energy investments towards the deep technology side of things, whether you're talking about CCUS or green hydrogen, at least in the case of India, has been done by all these conglomerates like Tata Steel, which is a big company, done by various state-owned enterprises like there's a generating company called NTPC, so they have done CCUS pilots and all. So I think that's how the money is being routed in this part of the world rather than very direct sort of venture capital or private equity kind of money flowing in. Yeah.
So the direct strategic partnership between the climate tech and the corporates help accelerate, right? Thank you so much. I see that I just want to check if there's any question from the floor. If not, I would like to take this very interesting question from the app. Speaking of lock-in and secondary markets, does anybody on the panel have an example of a project being refinanced post-COD to lower the financing costs and reduce the power price? Who would like to take this question from the floor? Maybe Jens? Yes, please.
Yeah, we were discussing this question earlier, and it was quite difficult to find suitable examples. And even if I'm now in APEC region, I would like to take benefit from the market I'm coming from originally, from the German market. So in the German market, it's a quite common phenomena that renewable energy assets are refinanced after duration of 10 to 12 years approximately, either to take opportunity of changed market conditions, in particular lower interest rates. So that's quite common there actually. And sometimes it's connected with repowering or complete or partial repowering of the power plant. But I've seen several wind farms, for example, where it was just refinancing after 10 years, where the initial investor was intentionally signing a loan agreement only for 10 years duration, despite the fact that the plant operation lifetime was in the range of 20 to 25 years. So there are cases, but these are more mature markets, of course, and I would not one-to-one transfer this to the APEC region. So I'm completely clear about the different market situations. Just saying that's something which will happen, and with this development will come into force with more mature markets, which we're definitely going to see here very soon.
Thank you. What I also, if I can add a little bit to that, what I also see when we're working on green bonds is some of the projects use green bonds as an instrument for refinancing to take advantage of change environments or market conditions, like what Jens was mentioning. So that's another example. I would like to, we have a few more minutes, so I would like to take the next question, asking about what financial instruments, so this is quite a broad question, what financial instruments or mechanisms have proven most effective in de-risking clean energy investments in emerging markets? And I would like to invite perhaps Dr. Treya, and if you can share also of the examples from India, and some of the type of instruments that transferable, some of the examples that transferable to other markets in APAC.
Yes, and as I mentioned, land risk was an important risk few years back. It still exists to be a big risk, but the government of India back in 2014 or 15 came up with a guideline which actually talks about setting up solar parks. So what does the government do? It basically goes and clears land parcels. So government being the highest being at the highest level of regulation can actually deal with people a lot more better than private parties dealing individually with people. So the government went around and actually cleared parcels of land across India. They provided basic connectivity such as approach road connectivity, basic water connection in the solar plants, providing grid connectivity. So it was just a plug and play model. So as a developer, I could just go pay some fees to the government and use that parcel of land. That highly de-risked a lot of land risk that was coming along. And these solar park models are fairly successful. You have them across the sunny regions, whether it's Rajasthan, Karnataka, Gujarat, and many other places. So this is a very important example. And in my opinion, there's a second important example which I think mattered a lot, was the policy around green energy corridors. So the government had the foresight to understand which were the major solar generating regions in the country that would put on a lot of solar capacity in the next decade or so, and which would be the next big demand centers. And much before time, they had all these policies where they were actually building transmission networks from the generating point to the demand centers, right? But sadly, what has happened is with the fall in the prices of solar and it becoming so popular, not just among developers, but among financiers, the amount of solar capacity has just increased more than what the government expected. So at this point of time, also there are a lot of shortages around uh, grid connectivity, and there's a lot of queues. But still, the government tried to do all these forecasting processes to actually set up those transmission corridors much before in time. Yeah.
Thank you. In the spirit of that question, we do have a very good financial instrument or mechanism here, actually both from Mr. Baral and also Jess. If you could share more of how we can actually what is the Mr. Baral first from your experience, because the SECF is actually quite a number of instruments in there. So what is the most effective that you see? And Jess, if you don't mind, share how you can scale up some of the work that you've done.
Thank you. Like the question, I can answer it in a more generic way. So any risk mitigation mechanism that boosts the private sector's confidence is the best one. I think that is the most important. But there is not a very standard risk mitigation mechanism. It depends on the technology, it depends on the project size. In certain cases, land acquisition is a high risk. In certain areas, getting financing it's a bigger risk. In certain angles, it's different. Coming back to Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund, where we clearly show the knowledge gap and some reluctancy from the financiers to finance such projects. So that's why we had this two-pronged approach. For improving the financial viability, VGP was established through Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund. For knowledge gap, a technical assistance was extended right from end to end, hand holding, as well as other aspects of feasibility, financial closure, matchmakings, and sectoral studies, demonstrations and educatings and exposures. All those things has definitely played the role, and you can see the results that it has able to achieve. And in terms of financing, as Jess said earlier, the Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund has one window that actually facilitates to the financiers as a loan loss guarantee. That also provides up to 20% of loan loss guarantee for the loan, just to motivate the motivate the financing institutions to look into those projects more broadly, and if though some of the risk could be mitigated, so that the project developer gets a finance. And once that is structured, let's say for first go, bank has more understanding on that. Private sectors have already developed the projects, and they can reinvest and build another project, so that this as he said, market develops, and over the period, guarantee is it's just reaches to zero, and market evolves as it is.
Thank you. Jess, is local banks, engagement with local banks a key to success and scale up?
Yeah, I think so. But I also think that, the devil is in the detail, right? And how you do it is critical. And if I had to point out one thing that we believe in is critical to achieve scale, it is to be market aligned. Right? We heard about before how subsidies can create a bit of a cushion that's a bit too comfortable for the market and for the banks. And we fully agree with that. So we decided very early on, we are not going to subsidize the market. We're not going to give away guarantees for free. We charge for the guarantees we provide. We charge the banks, right? Sure, we are donor driven. We're fortunate to have donor funds. But we also think it's critical that when we have conversations with the banks about how we build the market, that the incentives come from the same side, right? The banks are here to make money. We charge for our guarantees. And by doing that, sometimes that means we lose a deal, right? Or a project doesn't work out. But on the other hand, it also means that we have a stronger, more compelling argument when we talk to potential new funders for us to provide additional guarantee funds for the work, or anybody who were to do this in any market would be able to build a business case around this. As we were talking about before, right? We know that we are becoming better and better, and the banks are becoming better and better in evaluating risk related to solar loans. When we started our work, most of the banks in Myanmar that we worked with had not done any solar loans to speak of. Now they have a whole portfolio of renewable energy financing, which means they're getting better and better at understanding what drives risk in these loans. And so on the back of that and aligned incentives, that's really how we think about our growth and how to scale and do more in Myanmar and who knows, maybe in other countries too.
Thank you. I have a question here for Paula, actually. What do you look for in de-risking deep tech clean energy startups that have a long runway but can potentially have huge returns? Are you looking for returns? Or what do you look for in de-risking these startups?
Of course, for the startups themselves, they're looking for returns. But for us specifically, we're looking for first-of-a-kind technologies that we could de-risk. These startups will have access to the experts within RMI from different sectors. But with this first-of-a-kind ideas, then we'll be able to influence the market and get like more interest from, again, corporate off-takers. With corporate off-takers, you get the momentum, but we also want to get the guidance or also the support from the policy regulators, so they could gain, it could get confidence from more off-takers to enter that market.
Thank you. Actually, I'm conscious of time. Can't answer all the questions in the app, but there's one question that I would like to put to all the panelists. And we talk a lot about, policy support as well as public sector funding, private finance guarantee, technical assistance. There's one thing that we have mentioned, and that is carbon finance. And that was in one of the questions. So I would like quickly from the panelists, what do you think about the role of carbon finance in de-risking or return enhancements for clean energy investments? Please, each of you or whoever would like to go first.
For utility scale, solar, wind, probably battery storage, you can wait for the natural trajectory for prices to come down, and I think they are coming down rapidly. In a lot of places already solar and battery storage has found some parity with fossil fuel prices, not everywhere, but in some places. So I think at this point of time, there's already a natural financing mechanism that's actually supporting these projects and gaining profit. So at least for the utility scale projects, you might not require some sort of carbon finance there. Yeah.
So I'll take the other side. So for small scale distributed renewable energies solutions, this carbon financing would be really interesting, and there have been a couple of like an initiative that has already happened in Nepal as well, but at the same time, is it consistent? Are the prices always attractive? And how consistently we basically fund that and basically execute projects, it's really important. But definitely if that is built, carbon financing has a role to play, financing and promoting distributed renewable energy.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about scaling just before, right? And I think there's, at least in the work we do, there is not just one key to unlock scale. Purely de-risking and working with the banks is one thing, but creating financial resilience among the companies themselves, the SMEs in this case, is just as important, right? And carbon financing, credits, IREX and whatnot can be a key to unlocking that. So we believe that that's really critical for markets like ours.
Yeah, I'll try to keep you short. I was sitting here and promoting tailor-made solutions, and I believe that's the right answer here. They will definitely have their role to play. They're not in all projects which we see, but in some, there are situations where they are more suitable, as my colleagues already outlined, so I can only support your positioning there. Thank you.
Hola.
Carbon finance is very risky on its own, and it has a lot of verification needed, especially on the accounting side, to ensure the integrity of the carbon finance issued. If done right, though, it could unlock a lot of financing, especially for hard-to-abate sectors and renewable energy.
Thank you so much. I have a red light saying that time is up, but I would like to take a quick temperature from the audience. Who think carbon finance has a role to play? You can raise your hand. Okay, so with that, join me to give them a round of applause, please. Thank you so much for joining us in this session. Thank you, the panelists.
Thank you all.